Welcome to day 6, everyone. This is the 30-day novel, NaNoWriMo series. My name is Lynn Johnston, and I blog at writesmarternotharder.com. Once again, we want to think about, most importantly, how we're going to move the story forward today. We're getting really close to the first plot point. And in fact, tomorrow you're probably going to want to start writing the first plot point. And the first plot point, again, as we mentioned in previous videos, is basically a crisis that is forcing the protagonist to completely commit to whatever story goal you're going to have them pursue for the rest of the novel. So today it's important to think about how you're going to set up that crisis. What is going to happen to get your protagonist into that first plot point? And again, I want to emphasize that the first plot point may or may not be something that the antagonist has caused. It kind of depends on what the relationship is that you've set up between your protagonist and your antagonist. The antagonist is going to be working actively against the protagonist. The first crisis might be caused by something the antagonist does, but it also might be simply a situation in which the antagonist is competing with the protagonist. For example, if the big goal that your heroine is going to commit to is to get onto the cheerleading squad, the antagonist isn't going to cause cheerleading tryouts to happen, but the antagonist is going to be competing with your protagonist to try and win that spot on the squad. And maybe some of the crisis will be partially precipitated by the antagonist. Maybe your antagonist is going to sabotage the protagonist during the cheerleading competition tryouts. And that's cool. Either way works. It doesn't have to be one way or the other. Basically, you just want to think about how your antagonist is going to be working against your protagonist and what problems they can cause. And then also what has to happen for that crisis to take place, whether the antagonist is the cause or whether the story environment is giving birth or generating that cause. So for your protagonist, you want to ask yourself, what big choice is the protagonist trying to avoid? And by avoid, I don't necessarily mean trying to completely not think about, but it's basically something that they're very nervous or anxious or upset about. If your heroine is trying out for cheerleading again, she probably has a whole lot of doubts about whether or not she can actually make the squad. She's probably worried, oh my God, am I going to humiliate myself in front of everybody else? And then for the rest of my high school career, I will be that girl who fell on her face during cheerleading tryouts. So whatever that choice is, there is going to be some aversion, some sort of doubt, something that is making your protagonist conflicted about that choice. And this is also a point where if your protagonist has doubts and she's or he's considering giving up, this is a place to show that to the reader so that tomorrow, when she actually makes that choice, you've already kind of seen her, the reader has already seen her evaluate both sides and seen what she has both to gain from making that choice, but also what she has to lose by making that choice. So you'll have other characters that you're writing about today too, in addition to the protagonist. And you want to ask yourself, how do these other characters move us towards the first plot point? Why do they have to be involved? How are they going to help set up the crisis? Are they going to be friends of the protagonist who basically dare her to do tryouts or to dare her to do something risky at tryouts? Are they secretly working on behalf of the antagonist? Are they just neutral third parties who are pursuing their own agenda, but in some way making it more difficult for your protagonist to handle that crisis? And again, this is the point where you are going to want to think very hard about stakes. Conflict heavily depends on stakes because the stakes give your reader something to care about. If you set up your protagonist so that we know what your protagonist gains and what your protagonist loses going into this first plot point, that's what makes us sit on the edge of our seat and hold our breath, because we know it's going to be awesome if the protagonist does well, but also we know how painful it's going to be for the protagonist if they fail. So you want to think about consequences, what's going to happen, like best case scenario, worst case scenario. Let your protagonist worry about the worst case scenario. Maybe you want to throw in some foreshadowing. Maybe you want to kind of hint to the reader that things are going to go badly. Or maybe you want to throw the reader off and hint that things are going to go well, so that when the protagonist's best friends actually turns out to stab them in the back because secretly they've been offered something by the antagonist, for example, that's going to be an even bigger surprise. And also think about how you're going to make it clear to the reader what the protagonist has to gain or lose. One of the ways you can do this is through interior monologue, having the protagonist worry or contemplate or plan for the worst case scenario. If you see the protagonist preparing for different outcomes, that is a way of communicating it to the reader. Communicating it through dialogue, having your protagonist talk with someone else about what's at stake or what they're hoping for, what their dream is, what their biggest fear is, or even having your antagonist be the one who reveals the stakes. Maybe we learn what the cheerleading contest really means because the antagonist is talking to her mom, and we find out from the way that her mom is bullying her that her life is going to seriously suck if she doesn't make it onto the cheerleading squad. You do want to make sure that however you communicate the stakes, we know why it matters to the protagonist. So if you do use your antagonist for that, you're probably doing it more as a foil. And you're probably also going to want to find a way to show the protagonist hoping or fearing that the future is going to be good or bad. Setting, again, we will always want to look at our setting and see how our setting is generating elements of the story. And in this case, since what you're going to be writing today is going to be really focused on stakes and really making it clear what everybody in this scenario has to gain and lose, you want to think about how the stakes are being generated by or they're embedded in the setting. And what I mean by that is that the characters are not working in a vacuum. If there's two girls, a protagonist and antagonist, competing in a cheerleading competition, somebody in the setting has set up rewards for that. The setting contains natural consequences just by virtue of the fact that other people exist in this world and their opinions are going to matter to the protagonist and antagonist. So look to your setting, and that's another source of conflict also when you think about it. Like, who are all the people in your setting, all these secondary characters, maybe the contagonist, or maybe just other people in your protagonist's life. How are they going to be affected if your protagonist wins or loses? And how are they going to reward or punish the protagonist for winning or losing? And always we want to think about story promise. As you move the characters toward the situation where the first plot point crisis is going to occur, you're going to want to do maybe a little foreshadowing, or you're going to want to basically set the situation up so that the reader has some expectations going into it. The crisis is inevitably going to involve some surprises for your readers because it's going to involve surprise problems for the characters. But you're going to set the characters' expectations on what that event is going to be like. If you promise, if you set up the cheerleading competitions to where they're just a tremendously big deal and everybody who matters to the protagonist is showing up, that suggests that your protagonist is going to be very worried about how other people are going to see her as she's competing. And so if you don't show her being worried about all those people, you're saying that A, she's overconfident, or B, she just doesn't really care about what those people think. So think about how you're setting it up and what it implies about how your protagonist is going to feel about the event. Getting started, as always, you want to do your pre-writing ritual and your warm-up exercise. If it helps you get into the story, reread what you wrote yesterday. If it doesn't help, look at your notes, or just start fresh. Sometimes it's actually easier to get into the scene when you're looking at just a totally fresh page, especially if you're not exactly sure about what you wrote yesterday. You're like, oh, I might keep that and I might not. Giving yourself that fresh start is sometimes the best thing you can do. Of course, if you find yourself staring at the blank page, unable to write, go back to the last scene and look at it. And again, I want to say, don't give in to the temptation to edit. Keep moving your story forward. One of the worst things you can do when you're trying to write a fast draft like this is to let yourself start editing. And there's two reasons for that. The first one is that it just takes time away from the writing. But the more important one is it engages your inner critic. When you edit, your inner critic is doing constructive stuff for you. So if you edit and then you start writing, your inner critic is already active. And if it doesn't have anything to do with the writing process, which it doesn't, your inner critic is not creative, it will just use its energy to start criticizing your writing. And you'll start having a higher incidence of those thoughts where you're sitting there writing going, oh, that sentence is no good. Oh, no, scene is not turning out very good. Oh, man, maybe this whole novel is a piece of crap. So don't let your inner editor take you down that road where all of a sudden you lose faith in your story. Let your inner critic go on vacation this month. Promise your inner critic every time they start telling you, oh, you need to change this, say, I am going to change it. I'll make a note of that and move on, and we'll edit later. And the other thing I want to say is you're getting to the point now where if you haven't had a writing habit for a while, there's a good chance that you're starting to want to take a day off. You're going to be really tempted to maybe do a little bit less and let yourself off easy. And that's normal because if you're not used to writing this many words every day, you're probably going to start to feel mentally fatigued. And it's not necessarily bad to give yourself an easy day or to give yourself a day off. Sometimes that's all you need to recharge, but you need to be disciplined about it. If you are going to take a day off, don't do it by procrastinating on writing. Make a deliberate choice and say, I'm taking a day off to recharge, and use the writing time that you had set aside for NaNoWriMo to do something that actually recharges you. Any activity where you're vegging out, but you're also in the back of your mind stressing about the fact that you should be writing is not actually energizing. It actually adds to your stress levels, and stress exhausts you, especially creatively. So instead, I recommend make a definite decision and say, nope, I'm taking Friday off. I'm going to do some really good things for my mind. I'm going to get a little exercise, maybe go for a walk in nature. If you can do that, there's a lot of studies that show that people, they put people out in nature versus have them spend time in a inside or in an urban environment, and then they give them creative tasks. And the people who were outside in nature immediately before doing the creative tasks, those people did better than the people who were stuck inside before they did the creative tasks. So if you can do a little yoga, get some extra sleep, take care of your body, get a little exercise, basically do all those things that recharge you physically, because your physical vitality feeds your creativity. And again, don't get down on yourself. If you're starting to feel tired and you're like, oh my God, I'm running out of ideas, I'm never going to finish this novel, that's just going to make you more stressed out. And again, stress is exhausting. So I say to you, if you are like starting to feel tired, like you're wearing yourself out, just accept it's normal. It's what happens. You're going to get your second wind. I promise you it's going to come back. It's not like you're going to burn your creativity out and it'll be gone forever. You just need a little break, and you need to recharge yourself physically. And another thing I want to say is that while you're doing NaNoWriMo, you're kind of in training. In the same way that athletes train for a big event, NaNoWriMo kind of is, if you do it the right way, it trains you to be a professional writer, because it forces you to have a lot of the habits of professional writers. And if you were in training as an athlete, one of the things your coach would tell you is, hey, eat well, Get enough sleep. Do not stay up late. Make sure you go to bed at 10 o'clock or whatever your bedtime is so you get your 8 hours. And because you're training to be a pro writer here and training in pro writing habits, I'm going to recommend the same thing. Take good care of yourself. Go to bed early. Get enough sleep. Do all the things that actually keep you in top shape so that you can give your best to your novel. Of course, after you write, always want to celebrate your progress and do whatever it takes to set up your writing for tomorrow so that tomorrow there is no effort to begin other than to just sit down and do it. Happy writing, everyone. I hope you had a great day 6, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.